All right, so in the spirit of covering logical fallacies, I thought it might behoove us to cover one that I think happens quite often nowadays in arguments or discussions, and that's the argument of relativism or the subjective and objective kind of dichotomy. So, short video, I just thought I want to touch on this. So, oftentimes when we're discussing something, someone will bring up a point and the interlocutor or the opposing view will say, well, that's a subjective view. The problem with this, and the problem also with relativism, is that because something is subjective, doesn't also mean that that point could not also hold an element of objectivity in it. Just because someone is speaking or saying something and their point of view, their point might hold some kind of facility relative to their point of view or their perspective, doesn't mean that what they're saying is actually false. It might actually, or it doesn't mean that what they're saying is entirely subjective, right? So you can have a subjective view, doesn't mean that what you're saying is entirely subjective. It could hold a certain amount of objectivity in it. An easy example that kind of just comes to mind when thinking about this is, let's say you're at the doctor's office and you don't trust his opinion. You feel like he's giving you a subjective perspective on his diagnoses. Now, while that may be true, it might be true for all of us that we might have a subjective element in anything that we say. It's not necessarily false that his subjective view on what might be wrong with you is objectively false. It might be that what he's saying is absolutely correct, even though you might take it as subjective, and even though there might be a subjective element to what he's saying. Now, if we look into the logical fallacies, this would follow, it could follow others, but it would follow, I think the closest one it would follow is somewhere around the slippery slope kind of fallacy. And that's kind of where someone makes an assertion, but it starts to kind of fall back on itself because it's not completely accurate. Okay, so it's kind of like a domino effect. That's why the illustration is used as a slippery slope. As you can tell, it kind of like, okay, you're starting from here, you're making a point, but slowly the point starts to deteriorate if you look at it a little bit closer and bring in some other factors of logic around it. It starts to domino and deteriorate, just as in the case of the subjective and objective dichotomy. Because something is subjective doesn't necessarily mean that it's not objectively true. Thanks for watching. I'll be back with some more videos.